couple more folks. All right, I'm going to get started. We do have a couple more folks filtering in, but we'll get right into introductions. Good evening and welcome to FSR's event, Coping with Grief Through Artistic Expression. I am Angela Friedlander, Director of Development for FSR. We are so grateful for you all to be here tonight to come together during April's Sarcoidosis Awareness Month to learn more about ways you can choose to express grief creatively. Before we get started, I want to share a quick bit of housekeeping. The educational presentation of this event will be recorded to be utilized as a resource for our community. We would like to kindly ask everyone to remain on mute throughout the presentation. Following the presentation, you are welcome to participate in the exercise by turning on your camera and unmuting yourself. Feel free to utilize the chat button, but note that the Q&A function will not be enabled for this evening's event. As always, if you do not want to be on camera, please keep your camera off. Tonight's event will be led by Dr. Isis of Miami Art Therapy. Dr. Isis has been practicing art, psychotherapy, and mental health counseling in the South Florida region for over 40 years. She has worked in schools, hospitals, day treatment programs, substance abuse, eating disorder treatment centers, and residential settings. Currently, she offers full-time clinical art therapy services in public schools and maintains a part-time private practice, facilitates mindful self-compassion programs, and frequently presents the therapeutic art mindful doodling and mindfulness workshops locally, nationally, and internationally. Finally, before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsor. If I share my screen. We're so grateful for Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals for making today's event possible. And now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Isis.
Welcome everybody. Welcome Darlene and Dr. Govan and Gloria and Judith and whoever owns the phone at 716 and Ramon and Sam and Susan, the two Susans, and Trisha and Angela. Thank you all for being here. We couldn't do this without you. And we do encourage you to open your cameras if you're comfortable doing so. Of course, it's not a necessity. It's just then we can see each other, only if it works for you. And it's about presence and safety and all that good stuff. If that is comfortable, I know everybody's doing the best they can with their circumstances. So again, it's only a suggestion. So I want to begin with a soft landing practice and in mindful self-compassion, which is giving yourself, treating yourself the way you treat anyone you love when they're having a hard time. Usually we're a lot nicer to others than we are to ourselves when we're struggling. And so it's called a soft landing practice and it's an arrival practice. So this is designed to help us all show up completely because our minds generally have a travel agency and they're somewhere else. You might think you're here or we think we're here, and yet the mind is, going every hither and yon. So one of the ways we can establish presence or being with ourselves in the present moment fully is posture. And so I'm just going to invite you for a moment. And again, anything I'm offering is an invitation. Whatever works for you is great. Only you know what's best for you. And posturing is important because it gears us, it warms us up for paying attention. So ideally, if possible, you can sit in a straight and noble fashion. Doesn't mean like a soldier. It's feet are flat on the floor because that in the school system, I do this with kids in the classroom in the high schools, they're all slouching in their desks. The minute I say, put your feet on the floor, something happens. Our bodies wake up. Of course, hopefully we haven't been up all night texting like they have, but but this is a great resource, feet on the floor. It's called Soles of the Feet. Actually, surgeons do this before they go into surgery to ground themselves to the present moment. You might feel it. You might feel that grounding. It's quite effective. Another possibility is that hands and feet are uncrossed. Hands can be in your lap, palms down, palms up, or holding each other, or maybe on your heart, which is a supportive resource and brings warmth to us when we're hurting. If we put our hands on our heart, we could actually even out the parasympathetic nervous system for that moment. So that's another option. So I invite you, eyes open or closed, just to check in with your body right now, even if it's struggling, especially if it's struggling. And notice your breath coming in and going out just for 3 cycles. An inhale and an exhale is 1 cycle. And just welcoming yourself to here. How do you welcome people you love? If you have a pet, a best friend, a partner, a family member, a neighbor, someone you love and care about, how do you welcome them when they're lucky enough to be connecting with you? That's a warm, authentic welcome. That's what you deserve. Maybe you're just, I mean, the fact that you chose to show up here, there's so many Zoom rooms nowadays, it's exhausting. There's so many other, there's a million choices. I know you could be so many other places right now, but you chose this for yourself. Settle in and congratulate yourself for being here, for what you need right now. Maybe it's community, a feeling of connection. We all long for that. You all belong. You all matter. You all have value. And so just notice the connection to yourself by just recognizing, welcoming warmly yourself. And if you have any adversity that comes up at any time, recognize that and back off because it's normal. All sorts of things are possible. And it's just about compassion for ourselves and each other. And so I'm going to share my screen and treat you to a little PowerPoint presentation here. If you have some paper and pencil or markers or Sharpie or pen, we're going to be doing a little art if you're up for it. So we're talking today or experiencing, which is really how we learn, about the impact of making art with the expression of grief. You know, grief is a gigantic animal. All of us experience grief in all different ways throughout our lives. And in our culture, we really have a lot of grief phobia. We really don't have a chance, or we're not taught what really grief is about, or how we cope with it, or what we do about it, or say to other people that we know are grieving, because frankly, there are actually 16 different types of grief. So I believe that sooner or later, if we live long enough, we're going to touch on every one of them, because there's little losses, there's big losses. And I know the foundation here, a lot of people here are either caregivers or suffering themselves. And so I'm going to gently and quickly just touch on each one a little bit. What I want to really underscore is that grief in and of itself is completely normal. Normal. It's important. It's about our humanness. We're all compassionate messes. Anytime you suffer a loss, big or small, from losing your keys, which I imagine, I don't think I'm the only one here that does that from time to time, to losing a loved one, horrible losses, from the little to the gigantic, right? Or losing all sorts of things ourselves, philosophically, spiritually. I mean, it's very complicated. But when you start to pay attention in a kind, compassionate, hospitable manner, like you just did in our soft landing practice, you can soften the experience along with creativity. So normal grief is the first one in the list, because that's what we all experience in the little and big losses. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be behavioral, it could be social. It's usually can be experienced with physical reactions. You know what I'm talking about. We've all gone through this anyway. I don't have to go into too much of this. Behavioral reactions like forgetfulness and absent-mindedness and and confusion, emotional reactions like anger and shock and denial and irritability and apathy. All this is normal, relief. And then there's social reactions to grief. So grief is quite substantial in its impact on us in so many different ways. And the more we understand it, and the more we accept it, we can make friends with it. Imagine that, because it's normal. So if we go down the list quickly, anticipatory grief, that's the grief that we experience when we know someone's about to die, someone's in the dying stages, or a part of us is dying, maybe a role that we've had all our lives. Your children are going off to college. There's a lot of different types of anticipatory, but I'm talking about the real tough stuff. It's common if you're someone close to you in the future, you're expecting a loss and you're trying to envision your life without them. And sometimes there's positive sides to anticipatory grief because you're kind of preparing yourself as much as you possibly can. Complicated grief is when your process of grief doesn't move all the way through. It can be prolonged and it can be more intense. It's often complicated because the loss of a child or loss from a terrorist attack, or where I live in South Florida with that building that went down in Surfside, for example, horrible losses like that create complicated grief, which is not the normal grief cycle. It can be prolonged and often is helped by more support, either a grief counselor, a grief group helps in some way. Chronic grief is extremely intense reactions that do not subside. And again, that is something that people need when you experience that you don't have to go through it alone. You need community of some sort. It requires some kind of shift for that person. And then there's delayed grief, which can happen if you're experiencing such extraordinary feelings of sorrow and longing, even though maybe the death occurred a very long time ago. You didn't feel it. You were in shock for a really long time, and then it overwhelms you. Then there's distorted grief, where there's an extreme reaction to a loss. There could be a noticeable change overall, all of a sudden, kind of out of the blue, seemingly, or cumulative grief, which actually we all experience, because every time we have a loss, we remember all the other losses, the bigger ones on our grief timeline. It just adds to it. So we go back. And that's why the intensity can occur, because of cumulative grief. And especially if you experience a second loss, like for example, if you lose a partner and then there's a loss of income, a loss of your home, and so many other things that are shifting. So it creates a lot of that type of cumulative grief as well. There's also exaggerated grief, more intense reactions than what you typically see for the loss that you've endured. Secondary loss, when a loss affects several areas of your life, like I was telling you. So a lot of these overlap also. Masked grief is what it sounds like. That's funny because during COVID, it feels like we all experienced and still do masked grief. I'm talking about the mask, but really it's exhibited by physical symptoms or behaviors that tend to impair and hinder normal functioning. I really just want to normalize and acknowledge all the possibilities here. That's the purpose of this. Disenfranchised grief, we've all experienced this with so much tension and difficulty in the world right now, too, whenever your loss isn't validated by others. Like, even though I didn't have a relative in the Surfside condo, I experienced the loss just by living down here. And I'm a grief specialist. So working with people who had a relative there, who I'm still working with, actually, I experienced the pain myself, but I can't go to the funeral, so to speak. So there's a disenfranchisement, which is really complicated at times. That's why we need to talk to someone or express it in some way, artistically, through song or dance or poetry or a visual piece, whatever works for you. Then there's traumatic grief. It's trying to process the grief when there's added trauma on top of it from a horrifying, unexpected loss or violent death. If you've been watching the news you could have that kind of trigger going on easily as well, because we're all in this together. We're all intricately connected. And that's why there's collective grief. That's when a tragedy affects an entire community or a large group. Certainly, we've all had COVID together these last 2+ years. And we also see a collective grief after the death of a beloved figure in a community, or a terrorist attack, or a mass casualty. So that we've plenty of that going on these days. And then there's inhibited grief, means you're not showing any outward signs of grief, just holding it in, which can be dangerous for us. It could hurt us over time. And there's abbreviated grief, which is what it sounds like, when the person who passes away is replaced after a short time with someone or something new in your life. Because it's so difficult to quickly accept it. And none of these come with judgment. These are all human ways of coping. And finally, there's absent grief. And that's where you're not showing any typical signs of grief at all after a major loss. And typically this happens because of shock. So that's my Reader's Digest version of 16 types of grief. And I imagine you could relate to more than one of these. And that's why art making can be so potently healing for us. And we're using art very loosely. Any creative act is art. And rearranging your living room, changing your outfit, changing your makeup. We don't think, we tend to think of art as something you have to be skilled at, or for some reason, that's the way in our culture, but that's not what we're talking about here. Wherever your heart takes you, go there. You have some creative energy in you. If you think about it, we naturally go to some kind of creativity, whether you garden or you cook or you weave or you sing or you dance or you write, perhaps you journal, or perhaps you're a poet. And any of that is helpful, because not only is it a spontaneous expression, but it brings you a place to put the burden of your pain in. Art is a place that holds our suffering for us. It's a container. And that's why we're bringing this brief time to you today. And so we're going to do a little mindful doodling. And let me just give you a little description about what I'm talking about. First of all, when you talk about mindfulness, I'm sure you've heard that word. It's pretty popular and very confusing. It is the practice of being with ourselves, inside and outside, with full acceptance. Okay, so if you unpack that, that's what is my experience right now in my body, like it or not, regardless of if you like it or not, it's still going on in my body and in my life. It's the truth of the present moment. It's what's actually happening. And we tend to miss this because the mind starts to interpret and worry and take us to what used to be or what might be, and then we're off and running. And we miss here, now, this moment. So mindfulness that's why it's a practice, because it doesn't come naturally. And it can be done with your feet flat on the floor, hand on the heart, taking a breath. These are some resources to bring you back to now. Why? Because we're in our best place here. When we're worrying about the future, the past, and we're off and running, we're off balance. We don't make good decisions. Here is what is actually happening. And this is the truth of our presence now. Doodling, actually, the research in doodling has shown that when we doodle, and these are random marks, it's not a scribble, it's deliberate. We're making the marks on purpose. Scribbling, it just goes wherever it goes. We're making it on purpose. And when we doodle, we're not attached to it coming out a certain way. It doesn't matter if it's ugly, pretty, beautiful, horrible. No matter. It's kind of like life. It comes out the way it comes out, right? No matter what we do. And so without attachment to how it's supposed to look like we do in a drawing, I want it this way, we just put the pen or pencil or marker or whatever you're using to the paper, and we go with our experience and give it form. There's no wrong answer. We know that doodling enhances memory, decision-making, and problem solving. It enhances the executive function of the left side of the frontal lobe, the last part of the brain to develop when we're 25, 26 years old. So for our purposes today, I invite you to use whatever is comforting for you. If you hate art, you can do it in the air if you want to, whatever you want, or you can just listen. The advantage to having some form on a paper is it marks the moment literally and gives us something to refer back to. And when we're accessing ourselves this way, we're making the invisible visible. We're making the intangible, my experience of grief, tangible, something that has a form that's coming from you because you're the only one that knows best. You're living in this body 24/7. So I invite you here. We're going to go through the steps. And I want to give you time to doodle. Everybody has their own rhythm. So we'll pause first and give you a few moments to check in. And I say current grief experience. And what that can mean is your emotions that you notice. Name it, you can tame it. Maybe the sensations in your body right now. Maybe you have a tight chest. Maybe you feel tingling or warmth, coolness, moisture, heat, spaciousness. Maybe you feel hurt, tired, happy, confused. Just notice. It's all human. This is about being with our aliveness. And notice the outside. What draws your attention the most? What needs your attention the most right now? Your kind, loving attention. Which emotion or sensation would you like to get more acquainted with? It doesn't mean if it's grief or resentment or anger or a tough one, it doesn't mean you have to be best buddies. The invitation is to notice gently. Because this is sensitive. We want to be gentle. We don't have to hit ourselves over the head with it. And so take a moment to take inventory in your body and in your landscape inside and outside. Maybe there's an emotion that emerges from your heart. There might be a whole glob of emotions. Sometimes they stick around each other and they get overlapped. And see if there's one that you feel particularly ready to get to know a little bit more. And if there is more than one, that's okay too. And when you feel ready, if you're up for this, the invitation is to put whatever utensil you're using to make marks on paper and let the form of your experience emerge on the paper. Open, closed, tight, loose, long, short, narrow, wide, whatever. Go for it. There's no wrong answer. See what happens. Check in with your body while you're working on this. Stay focused, present, tender. This is intimacy practice. And color is emotion. If you want to add color, it's a little more vulnerable, it's a little more risky, but it's an option if you have colors available.
Dr. Isis, what do you do if you feel like you get stuck somewhere?
Then you would respect it and call it out. I feel stuck. And then you can ask yourself, well, what do I need right now? Do I need to take a break? Do I need to back off? Do I need to go outside? What do I need? Do I need a breath? Maybe, that's the body's way of saying enough for now, generally. When we think we're stuck, then we've interpreted it, and then that might shut us down even more, rather than thinking, wait, right now I need to take a break. There's no, and this is enough for now, for me. I've had enough. Like, when do I stop? And that's really a beautiful realization of what's enough, a boundary, a healthy one. So, and if we're stuck for a reason in this spot. Maybe we're just not ready to move beyond it. And the minute that we allow that, we're not going to feel as uncomfortable with it. We will just be with it, relate to it. Like, okay, we're here. Maybe my mind is thinking I should be somewhere else or further along in my whatever process. And then that's the mind stepping in, interrupting the body and trying to convince us that we're not okay when we're just being human. So thank you for that question, because we all end up stuck sometimes or in a spot where that's just all we can handle at this moment. It's enough. It's a boundary. And if we push against it, we're only going to create more suffering. But that's what we tend to do, because the mind convinces, wait, I have to go further or something. Yeah. And it's kind of our nature in a way, because the mind and the body often aren't in sync. They argue with each other. The body generally wins, though. If it doesn't want us to move, it's not going to let us, no matter what the mind thinks. So yes, thank you for that question. Good one. And it's a complicated one. Because we're giving ourselves permission to be. We live in a culture where we're supposed to be doing, but we're human beings, not doings. And I love seeing people focused. Actually, what you're doing is you're nourishing your brain right now. It's a feedback loop. So we can take, I encourage you to keep working. I'd like to have time to maybe have a little gallery display if you're up for that, and have people have an opportunity to perhaps, if you want to give your mindful doodle a title, a date, a story, maybe we could have a little storytelling opportunity here if anybody is up for that. So why don't we take another, I don't know. How about 5 minutes? How does that sound? Let me see, is anybody done now? We haven't had that much time. We can really, the thing is, when you get permission to make art, you lose track of time. You get in that state called flow. I'm sure you've all been there. Time doesn't really exist. You're just totally present and in relationship with yourself and whatever's going on with you. It's a beautiful experience, actually. So I'm hoping that's happening. And so we give people permission to make art. The worst part is to tell them time's up. You hate that part, so I want to be mindful of everybody's rhythm. So we'll, let me give it like 4 more minutes. And if you're not done, please keep going. In fact, maybe this will just inspire you to keep on after our workshop today, or make a practice of this in your own way, in your best way.